What is youth work and what is special about how it works with young people?
I interpret the first one as being very much about the purpose of youth work, what youth workers are trying to achieve. And that for me is about really trying to stretch young people in ways that they've not been stretched or developed before. I mean, my favourite phrase is, I hope that we can enable young people not just to go where they've never been before, but where they've never dreamed of going. And so that would be my take on, what is youth work. Now, what is special about it? I need here to give a caution before I get into that, because I'm really keen to make it clear that I'm not saying that youth work is a better practice than, say, a really, really good teacher in a classroom, or a really good social worker, or a really good careers advisor. All those practices have their own qualities, and they bring really, really important gains to young people. So it isn't about arguing that this is a better practice. But my argument is that it is a different practice. In fact, it's a distinct practice from others. And I have a number of reasons for saying that. But the two that I would particularly want to stress are, one, that this is a practice that young people join voluntarily. They choose to join. And not only do they choose to join, they choose whether to stay, and they can choose whether to go away. I'm tempted to swear there, but nonetheless, I mean, that is a really important factor. And one of the things about that, and I'll come back to this perhaps later, is that because they have that choice in the relationship, they have a level of power in the relationship which they do not have in most other situations, particularly in school, for example, but often with social workers and so on. So that choice is an absolutely fundamental, what I call, feature of the practice. And the other one that I would want to emphasise is that it's a practice that, partly, mainly perhaps because of that choice, has to start with the concerns and the interests and the priorities, not just of young people in general, but of the young people who actually turn up. So it imposes on the youth worker a practice process, which means that they have to begin by working with these young people and building trust in order that they can begin to identify what it is that these young people really want out of it. So that for me would be, I could name other things, but those two for me would be the really, really defining features of practice that distinguishes it from other practices. What I would want to add, I think, about what makes youth work a distinctive practice are two or three other things, because I think they are really quite important to record. One of them is that youth workers start with young people as individuals for who they are, and particularly avoiding the pressures to engage with them as problems to be sorted and so on. These are individual young people, individual human beings who turn up and who youth workers try to engage with for who they are as those individuals. But secondly, and there's some kind of contradiction in this perhaps, they also take into account the fact that young people so often engage with youth work and with youth workers, with their mates, in their groups, in their peer groups, which are very, very important to many of them. Not always positive, but nonetheless very, very, very important for them to be part of those. And therefore the youth worker needs always, and is always willing, I hope, to be working with them, with and through those group relationships, including trying to not just support those group relationships, but use those groups as processes, opportunities for doing the developmental, the educational work that they want to do with them. And I think the third thing that I would want to emphasise, which again other practices don't always have the chance to take into account, is that youth worker will engage with young people in relation to their wider community and cultural identities, as young women, as black young people, for example, gay and lesbian, whatever it may be, disabled, and work with those as the young person would bring them and as the young person would define them, and again see them as possible routes to opportunities for those informal educational developments that's at the heart of youth work.
What does it look like when it's happening and what effects can it have?
Well, what youth work looks like when it's happening varies in lots of ways. I mean, what you might actually see going on is, say, a drama group or a music group or a sports coaching group, which is very, very focused in on the activity and maybe getting the very best quality for that activity they can do. And the youth worker will certainly concentrate on that and value that. But as a youth worker, working with those in those more formal, more structured situations, they will also be keeping a very, very close eye on the dynamics of the group, the relationships between the young people, the power structure within the group. They will be working really hard to influence those, not just in the direction of making sure that the activity is high quality, but also that in personal and interpersonal ways, young people are taking from that experience more than just that they're getting the skills in the sports or the music or whatever. So that is and should never be underestimated as a very, very important way that youth work operates, what youth work will look like to the outsider. A lot of it will be hidden from the outsider actually, but nonetheless, that's what it might look like. But youth work is much broader than that. Youth work will happen when, for example, just as a young person arrives in the club, how they're greeted by the youth worker, group of kids sitting around in a coffee bar, youth work goes over and has a chat with them. There'll be those kinds of much more informal and spontaneous arenas where the youth worker will be really exercising, drawing on their skills to try and build a trust with the young people and get the development activity going on. Trying to establish what effects youth work has on young people will of course depend on who you ask. But with my youth work head on, whose words would I want to give priority to, but young people's words. And what I want to do is to just share with you some quotes that have been gathered from young people about their experience of youth work by a number of different research projects. So, for example, I make new friends at the club. I get creative, do activities. It's good to know about sexual health and knowing that we can get access to contraception through the youth workers. You actually learn from youth workers a lot. They change the mentality when you're actually out and about with your mates and you see stuff going on. It's helpful with the COVID situation, they give you masks. I saw youth workers about, and then we did my CV. My youth workers managed to get me a place at college I'm at now. Speaking to youth workers made me think, it's just not me who lives on this estate, it's about everyone who lives on this estate. I don't think I need to add any more to that. I think those are very, very powerful messages.
Given the chronic cuts across many sectors, youth work included, what can you see as the future for youth work?
The chronic cuts across youth work have been absolutely devastating and have in many, many areas, removed youth work facilities completely. There is some anecdotal evidence now that you might say to a 13 or 14-year-old these days, what about your local youth club? And they'll look at you and not even know what you're talking about. So we are starting from a pretty desperate situation. Now, the Johnson government did, let me just say first of all, there have been little bits of evidence of pickup. For example, that the number of courses for youth workers have increased a little over the last 2 or 3 years. And the Johnson government did promise something like £560 million to refurbish and build new youth clubs and youth spaces for young people, although that money also has to be shared with organisations like the Scouts, the Guides and the National Citizen Service. And also that money has been very, very slow in coming through. Even if it all came through, it still stops a long way short of reinstating the losses that have been made since 2010. So, the future for youth work? Well, I don't think the prospects are great. Our new Prime Minister seems to be promising us a new round of cuts, a new era of austerity. So what have we got to do? We've got to keep fighting, we've got to preserve what we have already. Like organisations like Chilypep have got to be sustained. And we need to keep challenging. We need to keep on saying this is a really, really important practice for young people and we demand that you provide the resources for it.